She almost canceled the date 3 different times. It was never supposed to be serious. Her friend had signed her up on a dating app as a joke after months of hearing her say she was done with love forever. She finally agreed to meet the man for 1 cup of coffee, planning to leave after 15 minutes. But life has a strange way of changing everything when kindness shows up at the right moment. Before the evening was over, her little daughter looked at a complete stranger, smiled with innocent eyes, and whispered one word that left them both frozen. If you've ever believed that one act of kindness can change an entire life, you're in the right place. Welcome to American Human Stories. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear about a moment when someone's kindness changed your life. Grace was 29 years old and lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Denver, Colorado. She worked long shifts as a nurse, raised her 2-year-old daughter, Nora, alone, and rarely had time to think about herself. 3 years earlier, Nora's father had walked away before she was born. He disappeared without leaving an address, a phone number, or even a goodbye. Grace stopped believing promises after that. She learned to depend only on herself. Most evenings were the same. She would pick Nora up from daycare, stop by the grocery store, make dinner, read bedtime stories, and fall asleep on the couch before midnight. Dating wasn't part of her life anymore. One Friday afternoon, her best friend Sarah smiled and said, "Please, just one date. If it's terrible, I'll never ask again." Grace laughed. "Fine, 1 coffee. That's all." The man she was meeting was named Alexander, the CEO of a mid-sized logistics company downtown. Though Grace didn't know that yet, the app had only shown his first name in a plain photo. When Saturday arrived, Grace almost canceled. Then her babysitter called with bad news. "I'm so sorry," the babysitter said. "My son is sick. I can't come." Grace sighed. She was about to text Alexander when his reply arrived first. "No worries if you need to cancel." She hesitated before typing, "I actually have my daughter with me now." A minute later, another message appeared. "Bring her if you're comfortable. We can meet at the park instead of a coffee shop." Grace stared at the screen. No complaints, no awkward questions, just understanding. She decided to go. Alexander was already waiting when they arrived. He wasn't dressed to impress. No suit, no sign that he ran a company with hundreds of employees. Just jeans, sneakers, and a baseball cap. He stood up with a warm smile, but didn't reach out to hug Grace or shake Nora's hand. Instead, he knelt down to Nora's eye level. "Hi," he said softly. "I brought Bubbles. Is that okay?" Nora nodded with excitement. Within minutes, the little girl was laughing as Bubbles floated through the afternoon sunlight. Grace watched quietly. Most men tried too hard around children. Alexander simply let Nora be herself. After they walked through the park, they bought sandwiches from a nearby food truck. As they sat down, they noticed an elderly man struggling to carry several grocery bags across the parking lot. Without saying a word, Alexander stood up. "I'll be right back." He carried every bag to the man's apartment building 2 blocks away. When he returned, Grace smiled. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Alexander answered. "But he did." That simple sentence stayed with her. Over the next hour, they talked about work, family, dreams, and disappointment. Alexander admitted that running his company had cost him more than he liked to admit. Long nights, a fiancée who had died in a car accident 5 years earlier, and years spent hiding behind his work instead of facing the grief. "I spent a long time angry," he confessed. "Then I realized life is too short not to be kind." Grace didn't know what to say. No one had spoken so honestly to her in years. As the sun began to set, Nora grew sleepy. Alexander picked up the diaper bag without asking and carried it toward Grace's car. She noticed little things. He opened doors. He thanked the cashier by name. He smiled at strangers, not because anyone was watching, but because that was simply who he was. Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Just as she buckled Nora into her car seat, the little girl stretched out her tiny arms toward Alexander. He leaned closer, thinking she wanted a goodbye hug. Instead, Nora gently touched his face. Then she smiled. "Daddy." Everything became silent. Grace's heart nearly stopped. "I'm so sorry," she whispered quickly. "She doesn't understand." Alexander looked at Nora for a long moment, his eyes filled with tears. He smiled gently. "I'm not her daddy," he said softly, "but thank you for trusting me." There was no awkward laugh, no joke, no uncomfortable expression, only kindness. On the drive home, Grace couldn't stop thinking about that moment. Children often sense things adults overlook. She wasn't saying Alexander was perfect, but Nora had felt safe. That mattered. A week later, Alexander invited them to the zoo. The next weekend, they visited a pumpkin patch. Sometimes they baked cookies together. Sometimes they simply walked around the neighborhood. Alexander never rushed Grace. He never tried to replace anyone. He simply showed up again and again, even skipping board meetings when Nora had a school event, something his assistant noted he'd never done for anyone before. When Grace worked late, he dropped off homemade soup. When Nora caught the flu, he left medicine and groceries on the porch without expecting to come inside. When Grace's car broke down during a snowstorm, Alexander drove 40 miles after work just to make sure they got home safely. His kindness wasn't loud. It was steady. Months passed. One evening, Nora scraped her knee while playing. She started crying. Alexander gently cleaned the cut, placed a colorful bandage on it, and told her she was the bravest little girl he knew. She wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. "I love you." Alexander hugged her carefully. "I love you, too, kiddo." Grace watched from the kitchen doorway with tears in her eyes, not because because someone had rescued her, but because someone had chosen to love them without asking for anything in return. The following spring, Alexander invited Grace and Nora to the same park where they first met. He wasn't carrying flowers. He wasn't holding an expensive ring box. Instead, he carried a small photo album. Inside were pictures from every moment they had shared. The bubbles, the zoo, the pumpkin patch, cookie-covered smiles, snowy afternoons, hospital visits after long shifts, birthday candles. Every page told the same story. Kindness. At the very end was one empty page. Alexander looked at Grace. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," he said, "but if you'll let me, I'd like to keep filling these pages with both of you." Grace couldn't hold back her tears. "Yes," she whispered. Nora clapped her hands. "I knew it." A year later, Alexander officially adopted Nora. When the judge finalized the adoption, she ran into his arms and shouted the same words she had spoken on that first date. "Daddy." This time, everyone smiled through happy tears. Sometimes people believe love begins with grand romantic gestures, but often it starts with something much smaller. A patient conversation, a helping hand, a quiet sacrifice, a heart willing to care without expecting anything back. Kindness is a way of opening doors that force never can. It builds trust where fear once lived and creates families where loneliness once existed. You never know how deeply one gentle act might touch another person's life. So today, choose kindness even when no one is watching. Offer grace, lend a hand, speak with compassion, and love generously, because the smallest act of kindness may become the beginning of someone else's happiest ending. If this story touched you, hit that like button, subscribe to American Human Stories for more, and drop a comment telling us which moment moved you the most. We read every one.